to my poemathon. So to begin, the significance of poetry. So poetry allows individuals to explore and express deep personal experiences. And poetry is used as a form of expressing complex emotions in impactful ways. And poetry also allows us to foster empathy, encourages reflection, and can provoke thought and inspiration. So a quote that really nicely reflects all of this is poetry is articulating the inarticulable, because in poetry we're using abstract ideas and we're comparing them with concrete things, which allows the reader to more thoroughly understand what the poet is trying to express. So literary devices. So literary devices, like I just said, they allow us to interpret things in another way. So it can invite readers to consider many interpretations of a poem and can have various layers of meaning. Literary devices can also effectively convey emotions to closely resonate with the reader. And literary devices also help readers visualize and emotionally connect with a poem. Literary devices also help establish structure and add musicality to a poem, so like rhythm, melody, rhythm scheme, all that sort of things. So here are some examples of literary devices: metaphor, irony, oxymoron, alliteration, allusion, personification, assonance, imagery, foreshadowing, simile, pun, onomatopoeia, idiom, and hyperbole. So these are just a few out of many different literary devices there are, but for the purposes of today, we are just going to be discussing these 7. So to start, what is a metaphor? So a metaphor establishes imagery by comparing two non-similar things. So here are some examples. Time is money. We are directly comparing time to money. He is a cheetah on the track. So it's comparing a person to a cheetah. And then this is a more poetic example. Hope is the thing with feathers. So it's comparing hope to feathers, basically. And it's good to note that in poetry, metaphors are usually used to compare a abstract idea to a concrete idea. So hope is a abstract, and then we're comparing it to feathers, which is concrete. And then next we're going to talk about alliteration. So alliteration is repetition in 2 or more nearby words of initial consonant sounds. So here are some examples, some well-known examples, like jumping jacks. They both have the letter J, so it's repeating and it adds emphasis, I guess, in some ways. Rocky road, the RO is seen in both words, so it adds emphasis again. And then this is a more poetic example from The Raven. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping. So there is the repetition of the N, and it's repeated for each of these 3 words, which brings us back and makes the reader very much focus and pay attention to it. Okay. And then personification is an idea or thing that is given human attributes and or feelings, or is spoken of as if it were human. So this is a more complex idea and is harder to wrap around, I guess. So I just like to say the type of metaphor, which is true. So some examples is my alarm yelled at me this morning. So an alarm cannot yell at a person. It's given human emotions and an action in this form, I guess, because the alarm is yelling. The moon smiled at me. Again, smiled is a human action, so it's given to the moon. And then this is a more poetic example by Emily Dickinson. The mountain sat upon the plain in his eternal chair, his observation omnifold, his inquest everywhere. So it's basically saying that the mountain sat, which a mountain cannot sit. But sometimes it can be confusing because you don't really know if we're truly talking about it in that form. So it can be a little confusing, but in this context, it is a form of personification because we're going into detail, and the way that the mountain is described almost sounds like a person, and we're giving it a pronoun. Next up is imagery. So imagery is figurative language to evoke a sensory experience or create a picture with words for a reader. So imagery is just a very descriptive context of something. So it's just very detailed to make the reader feel like they are there in the poem. And it usually uses one or some of the five senses: vision, smell, hear, touch, and taste. So here are some examples, and I didn't put any photos so that you can really try to visualize it in your mind. So I came inside because the house smells like a chocolate brownie. So we can like sense it and smell it in our minds and feel like we are almost there. And then here's a more poetic example from Charlotte Perkins Gilman from the Yellow Wallpaper. The color is repellent, almost revolting, a smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow-turning sunlight. It is a dull yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulfur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. So in this example, they're talking about yellow wallpaper, and we can really visualize it in our minds because they talk about the color deeply, and they also talk about like the smells and some of the senses that can help us like see the color almost. And we have similes. So a simile, the definition is two essentially dissimilar objects or concepts that are expressly compared with one another through the use of like or as. So it's good to note that the definition of a simile is very similar to a metaphor, but like I highlighted it here, a simile always uses like or as to compare things. It's either one of those two words, otherwise it is considered a metaphor if those like or as is not present. So here are some examples. Your eyes are as bright as diamonds. So it's directly comparing eyes to diamonds with the use of as. If it said your eyes are diamonds, then that would be a metaphor. And love is like a beautiful butterfly. It's comparing love to a butterfly using the word like. And then here is a example from a poem by Lemony Snicket, Horseradish. A library is like an island in the middle of a vast sea of ignorance. So it's comparing a library to an island. And then next we have an onomatopoeia. So an onomatopoeia indicates a sound that sounds like what it refers to or describes. So it is a word to mimic the natural sound of an object or action. So here's some examples to make more sense of that definition. Ding dong, the bells chimed. So in that one would be ding dong. And then here's a more poetic example again from William Shakespeare in The Tempest. Hark, hark, bow wow. The watchdogs bark, bow wow. Hark, hark, I hear. So as you can see, they use a lot of onomatopoeias here to make kind of project the sound and like mimic it in the poem. And now we're moving on to hyperbole. So a hyperbole creates a heightened effect through deliberate exaggeration to add emphasis. So it's just over exaggerating something to add emphasis to it and make the reader really focus on it. So here are some examples. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. I love you to the moon and back. And the last one is by William Shakespeare in the sonnet 147. My love is as a fever, longing still for that which longer nurseth the disease, feeding on that which doth preserve the ill, the uncertain, sickly appetite to please. So in this excerpt, love is being compared to a fever, which is good to know is a metaphor in here, but it is more in a hyperbole because the text goes on to exaggerate the fever of love, and it just goes on, and it's just very over exaggerated. Okay, so now we're going to analyze a poem. So I've put a little chart here of the poetic devices. There's some other ones in here, but we're just going to focus on the ones that we just discussed for now. So this is by William Wordsworth, and it's called Daffodils. It's a very famous poem, and this is just a part of it. I would recommend looking into it if you are interested in this poem, though. Okay, so I'll read it out now. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on higher vales and hills, which all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. Okay. So when I read this, I immediately notice that we are talking about daffodils, right? Based on the text. And there are some literary devices that I noticed right away, but I want you guys to try to read through and really focus on what the definition says and try to understand what you think the text means and what the literary devices are. Okay, so now I'm going to reveal the answers.
Could we have the poem again? Could you read the poem again?
So this is Daffodils, once again by William Wordsworth. So, I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on higher vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in a sprightly dance. So in this text, the meaning of it, you can interpret it multiple ways, but the main meaning of this is talking about the poet in the beginning walking and seeing a bunch of daffodils. And then the poet goes into deep description of the daffodils and starts creating illusions of the daffodils and using many literary devices to describe them and the setting that the poet is currently in. So I hope that we all try to approach this poem and analyze some of the literary devices. I see some replies in my chat here. Thank you for partaking in this. Okay. Here are the answers. So in the first line, I wandered lonely as a cloud is a simile because we are using the word as to compare the poet to a cloud. And then the next part here is considered imagery, mostly this part of the text, but you can also argue that the second paragraph also, because we get a better description of the daffodils as well. But for now, we'll just focus right here. That floats on higher vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees. So this is very descriptive, and it helps us really visualize everything. And it's important to note that they used the word golden to describe the daffodils instead of just yellow, which really adds more context and value so the reader can really interpret it and visualize it better in their minds, I guess. Next up, we have fluttering and dancing in the breeze. This is a form of personification because we are referring to the daffodils and we're saying that they're fluttering and dancing, which are human actions. Next, we have continuous as the stars that shine. This is also a simile. We use the word as, which is good to know. So it's not a metaphor, it's a simile. And also, we're referring to the daffodils. So we're saying that the daffodils are like stars. And then we have another personification here. They stretched in never-ending line. So this is one of the cases that I personally get a little confused on, but in this context, this would be considered personification because daffodils cannot stretch, but that could be argued against because sometimes people use that as a term to describe crops, like they stretch along a certain land. But this is a poem, so we're most likely just going to say that it's personification. And then near the bottom, we have 10,000 saw I at a glance. So this is an onomatopoeia because it's over exaggerating how many daffodils that there probably are there. And then the last line is also personification again, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. So this is referring to the daffodils, and it very much just describes like a human action, but is being given to a daffodil. So that's the exact definition of personification. Okay. And now I would like you guys to try to write your own poems using some of these poetic devices that you think would be well fit into your poem.
I have a poem I have written.
Oh, would you like to share it?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, what shall I eat at the party? It should be stomach filling and hearty. First, I start with an orange sip to quench my thirsty lips. Then I have a piece of samosa, followed by a big dosa. When I was leaving, my friend gave me a kiss. Now I wonder why such parties do children miss. Thank you.
Well, I really liked your poem. I liked how you used like a rhyme scheme there, I noticed. Good job. I'm very proud of you. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to the next slide. Thank you for all participating. That was a very beautiful poem. Thank you for sharing that. So now we're going to be talking about the types of poems. So we have haiku, sonnet, limerick, free verse, ballad, and concrete. So we're going to be discussing all these poem types. There are more, but these are the most used and commonly known poem types. So before we start, what is the importance of different types of poems? So different types of poems provide various frameworks for expression, and each form comes with its own unique rules, such as syllable count, rhyme scheme, line length, and these different rules help strengthen the message of a poem in some ways. And poets can engage with the literary past by using these different poem types, by either adhering to classical standards or by experimenting and pushing boundaries. So in this bullet point that I put here, adhering to classical standards. So I just thought it was important to know here that some classical standards include sonnets, which is very commonly known, which we will discuss, but that is very commonly used today as well. Thank you for that reaction. So sonnets are very commonly used today to express the past as well as now. And another thing that's important about different poem types is different types of poems offer readers a wide range of experiences. So we will look through the different types and you'll get a better understanding of why that is. But these are just some qualities to know for the importance of different poem types. Okay, so to start, a haiku. So a haiku is a Japanese poem where it derives from, and it consists of 3 lines with 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the second, and 5 in the third. And it's usually a poem pertaining to something involving like in nature. So here's a quick example by Donna Brock. Curving up then down, meeting blue sky and green earth, meddling sun and rain. So in this poem called The Rainbow, this is a haiku, and there's no rhyme scheme as you notice. It's just the syllable count, and it's just describing a rainbow, obviously, and it does so within this syllable count. Now we'll move on to the next type, which is a sonnet. So like I said earlier, a sonnet is a very classical form of a poem type that, in this example, William Shakespeare does. And William Shakespeare has done a lot of sonnets, like over 200. So this is Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? And a sonnet is basically 14 lines. Each line has 10 syllables, and the poem has a fixed pattern of rhymes. So by fixed pattern of rhymes, it really depends on the poet. There needs to be a certain pattern. There isn't a particular rhyme scheme that a sonnet needs to have. It just has to have a pattern. It can't just be randomly put together. Anyway, so now I'll read this. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lowy and more temperate. Oh, I think that's lovely. And more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and sometimes leaf hath all too thor a date. Sometime too hot the eye of Hulan dines, and often in his gold complexion dimmed, an eerie flare, from fair foam time declines by chance or nature's changing counterfeitum, by thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor loof Pophaeon of that fair thou shall death brag thou wander in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growth, so long as men can breathe or I can fee, so long lives this, and this guy's live to thee. So this is a little harder to read because it's very old, but as you can see, it is 10 syllables per line, and the rhyme scheme for this poem is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, 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 D, E, F, E, F, G, G. So for most of the poem, the rhyme scheme consists of every other line rhyming. And quickly, I'm just gonna tell you about rhyme scheme because it's important to note. You probably already do, but I'm just gonna give a quick refresher just based on this poem. So as you can see, rhyme scheme works as comparing every last word in a line of a poem. So in the first line, the last line is day. So that would be labeled as A because it's the first line and it's the first letter that we're gonna have to find a rhyme for it for. And then the second is temperate. So that would be considered B because it doesn't rhyme with day. Then the third line says May. So that does rhyme with day. So it would be considered an A. And then if we moved on to the fourth line, the word is date, temperate. It's considered rhyme in the poem. I don't really know how well it does rhyme, but that would be considered B then. So that's just how rhyme scheme works for a refresher. Now we're gonna move on to the next poem type, which is limerick. So limerick is a humorous poem consisting of 5 lines in which the first, second, and fifth line have one rhyme and the third and fourth another. So here's an example. My dog is quite hip. My dog is quite hip, except when he takes a cold dip. He looks like a fool when he jumps in the pool and reminds me of a sinking ship. So the rhyme scheme here is AABBA, since it goes hip, dip, fool, pool, ship. All right, and then the next one is called free verse, and it's basically exactly as it sounds. So it's a type of poem that doesn't follow a specific meter or rhyme scheme, and instead tends to follow the rhythm of natural speech. So here's an example, the reminder. I was not happy with the rain until my eye caught 5 wet leaves, a mysterious autumn watercolor gift here on this broken road. So as you can see, I put both the rhyme scheme and the syllable count here, and there is no specific pattern for either. So free verse just gives a poet like their own freedom in writing their poem to better express themselves without having to just focus on one particular poem type. Next up is ballad. So ballad is a narrative poem that tells a story in short stanzas, often with a musical quality and rhyme scheme. So here's just part of, oh, hello, yes? You have a question?
Yes. What is the difference between a ballad and a free verse?
Oh, okay. So a ballad is a narrative poem. I wrote it here. So it's usually a musical quality. This is a good question, by the way. Thank you for asking, because both of ballad and free verse, they don't follow a particular rhyme scheme or like paragraph, like sorry, what's the word? Syllable count. So they don't, neither of them follow those type of rules. But the difference is a ballad is a narrative poem. So it tells a story. And it usually has some sort of melody or like musical quality to it. So that defines the difference between the two. Free verse is more just giving a poet their own freedom to write a poem, while ballad follows the standards of like writing a poem in a narrative, like a story, sort of. Does that answer your question?
Very well explained. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Any other questions while I get this back uploaded?
I think Rohan has a question.
What's alliteration?
Oh, okay. Give me 1 second. I can go back to that slide. Okay. Let me find the alliteration slide. So we talked about this before. This is basically, I think it's good to look at the examples here. So alliteration is just words that have repetition in the beginning of its sound, so it has a consonant. And basically, alliteration allows a poet or speaker to put emphasis on some words by like repeating the beginning.
Oh, so similar sounds.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, no problem. Okay, and now I will move on to, I think we were at ballad. So this is an example from Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. So in this part, this is just an excerpt. I did put this short like definition of everything. This is a famous poem, and it's important to note that this is 600 lines long in length. So this is just a small portion of it. A ballad is almost like a book. Like this excerpt is from a book by Samuel Coleridge. So, but if you're interested in it, here is a short description of this poem. And so concrete. So concrete makes active use of typography, color, spacing, and the arrangement of words and symbols to create a visual art object. So basically what this means is you take an idea or something that you're describing and you try to make it more concrete by trying to visually make it into the thing that you're describing. So a good example are these two. This one is of an umbrella. It says, my umbrella keeps out the sun. My umbrella keeps out the rain. My umbrella gives me shelter, especially from a hurricane. And then this one is of a cat. Some of these can be a little harder to read, I feel. So that's why I just included this one. But once you start reading it, like you'll be able to get through it. But yeah. So now I made this little game for us to play. Trying to guess which poem structure it is. So you can try to go back real quick. Does anyone want me to review the ones that we just saw, or are you okay?
Yes, please. Could you just review the 4?
Yes. Please give me 1 second. I will reopen it. Does anyone have any other questions besides that? Okay. I have it open now. Okay, give me 1 second here. Can you see my screen right now, or is it paused?
We can see the scheme.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. Okay, so we're gonna do a quick review before we do our little game. So a haiku is, it consists of 3 lines. The syllables are 5, 7, 5, okay? So yeah, sonnet, 14 lines, 10 syllables, okay? Limerick, humorous poem, 5 lines with the rhyme scheme of AABBA. So then we have free verse, which is just like the poet's own like specific poetry type, and there's no pattern to it. It's important to note that when we're playing this game, it likely won't be free verse if you are like, you have to try to eliminate every other option to determine if it's free verse, basically. And then ballad is a narrative poem with a musical quality to it. And then concrete is supposed to make active use of like color spacing to make it look like a visual art object. So now let's play this game where we try to guess which type it is. So you can either write in the chat or say it out loud and like take your mic out. So let's try it out now. So this is the first poem. I know an old owl named Boo. Every night he yelled who. Once a kid walked by and started to cry and yelled, I don't have a clue. So these are our options here. A, haiku, B, limerick, C, sonnet, and D, ballad. So
Is it haiku?
Oh,
thank you for guessing, but no. Any other guesses?
I think it's limerick.
Yes, good job.
Yeah.
Could you explain why it's limerick?
Yes.
Because it's rhyming.
Yeah, good job. So yes, like I was talking about, for limerick poems, there is a specific rhyme scheme of AABBA. And it also, I think it said on the slide that limericks have a like funny quality sometimes, like the one example I showed. So yeah, just look at the rhyme scheme and just check everything.
What's the geographical origin of limerick?
I'm pretty sure it originated in Ireland. I could try
Yes,
to
you're right.
that for you. Okay. Yes. Thank you for that question. Okay. Moving on. Try to guess this poem. So this is a longer poem, just to note. And I did give a hint about this earlier, but it is an older poem, so that might be a hint for you. This is composed upon Westminster Bridge by William Wordsworth. So I'll quickly read it, and then I'll read the answer choices, and you can try to guess. So, earth has not anything to show more fair, dull would be he be. Earth has not anything to show more fair, dull would be he be. Soul would pass by, in sight so touching in its majesty. This city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning, silent bare. Ships, towers, domes, theaters, and temples lie, open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendor valley, rock, or hill. Nearer saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet hill. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that my heart is lying still. So the answer choices are A, concrete, B, limerick, C, sonnet, or D, ballad. I would say for a hint, count how many lines there are in this poem and then determine.
Is it sonnet?
Yeah, good job, Maya. Yeah, it is a sonnet. Good job. Okay, now this is the last one. So I changed the answer choices up a bit so you would be able to guess on your own. I will quickly read it though. Starlight, star bright, star shining in the dark of night, over a cavern deep and dark, inside the cave a baby's born, who shall die on the cross. But do not mourn, for he is the one to save our race, for we have fallen from grace. 3 kings and 3 shepherds have come by your light through this cold, dark, and wintry night. Okay, and the answer choices are A, ballad, B, limerick, C, free verse, or D, concrete. Any guesses?
I think it's a ballad.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's incorrect though. Ballad, if you remember, it's a good guess, but ballad is a lot longer.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Thank you for trying. Any other guesses, or should I reveal the answer?
I think it's concrete.
Yes, good job, Vish. The answer
Thank you.
is concrete. It's concrete. Okay, so
Is there
now,
a prize I get for getting them right?
yeah, you get a certificate actually. Once you fill out that Google form. Now, I would like you guys to try and create your own poem, trying one of the styles listed. So I only did these 4 because they're probably the easiest to make and say. So yes, please try and make your own poem in that form.
Okay, I think I have one.
Okay, great. Would you like to share?
Sure.
Okay.
Life is a tall, tender tree. For if life is a tall, tender tree, for then life is joy, life is free. The tree is dancing in the air, sunny or showers, with his joy, with his love, and his flowers.
Wow. I really liked how you used some literary devices there, I noticed. Which type of poem was this, if you might, I ask?
Limerick.
Wow, that was humorous. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else want to share, or are we good for this part?
I think we're good for this.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Vish. We're gonna move on now. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about analyzing poems. So, like we've been doing, we've been discussing literary devices, structure poem, rhyme scheme, and meaning. So now we have to put those into action. So here are the 4 things you need to do when approaching a poem. So, like we discussed, finding important literary devices in the poem. You don't have to do this in this exact order, by the way. This is just the order in which we discuss things, but yeah. Number 2, look for what poem type it is. So like we discussed, haiku, limerick, sonnet, ballad, free verse, and numerous others, but those are the main ones that we'll probably be looking for. And it's also important to note that for the examples I'm going to give, they're from longer poems, so most of them are just free verse, so we won't be trying to guess which poem type it is. And then third, we're going to look for the meaning of the poem, what it like means in terms of your personal perspective of it or someone else's, whichever. And then 4, we'll be analyzing the rhyme scheme of it. So let's get started with our first poem here. So this is Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. And as you can see here, here's the poetic devices list. And there's also alliteration. It was on there before, but that might be a clue here that there might be alliteration in this. So I'll read it really fast, or really quickly. So this is Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I'll rise. So I'm gonna give you guys a few seconds to take in the poem and try to think of which poetic devices you notice in this excerpt.
I have a poem at some point I could share.
Okay, how about once we finish analyzing this poem, you could share it? Or would you like to share it now?
No, let's analyze this poem.
Okay.
Rohan has a good analysis of the poem he'd like to share.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
We're looking for the literary devices. Do you see any that you notice right away? based on this list here?
I think there's some limerick,
Yeah.
and there's some rhyme,
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit of repetition. Maybe not repetition.
Or no, I think you might be right with that. There is.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. And what else do you think?
Okay, well, I'll show you guys the answers now. Thank you for that input, Vish. Okay, so here are the answers. Here, I'm gonna mute you real quick here. Sorry. Okay, so here are the answers. So there is a metaphor in the beginning. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt. So in this part, because we are comparing the act of writing history with lying. It's harder to notice, I feel, but it is present in that portion. And then we also have imagery throughout those lines. You may trod me in the very dirt. Like that's very descriptive, so we can really visualize it. And again, with the line underneath, but still like dust I'll rise, which is also a simile because we're comparing the poet to dust. And again, repetition of I'll rise, which becomes apparent in the rest of this excerpt. And then we have another simile in the second paragraph, because I walk like I've got oil wells. So it's comparing the poet to oil wells, basically. And then again, in the last stanza, just like moons and like suns. So it's comparing the poet to moons and also suns through the use of the word like. And same with the line underneath, just like hope springing high. So it's comparing hopes, it's comparing the poet to, I believe, it's comparing the poet to hopes. And that's also considered personification because just like hope springing high, hopes cannot spring. So we're giving hopes a human characteristic there. Okay, and now I've cleaned it all up, so we're gonna be able to better look at the poem again to find the rhyme scheme. Now again, like I've touched on before, the rhyme scheme is the last word in every line, and we just give it a letter based on if it rhymes or if it doesn't. So I'll quickly just read out each last word, and you can try to start thinking about how the rhyme scheme of this poem works. So we have in the first line history, then lies, dirt, rise, you, gloom, wells, room, suns, tides, high, rise. Sorry. Okay, and now I will be revealing the answer choices for this one. So as you can see, we have the rhyme scheme of A, B, C, D, and then D, E, F, E, F, G, H, G. So it looks like every other line, so it goes like the second line and then the fourth line rhyme for every stanza is what I'm noticing. Okay, and then let's try to find the meaning behind this poem. So I really want your guys' input on this as to what you think that this poem means. And really think about the repetition like we mentioned and what that means. So is there any input that we would like to add or no?
No, I think it's good. Thank you.
Vish, anything?
No, I think it's I like it. There's some of the different elements.
Get the different like meanings behind it, like, or no?
I think it's an inspirational poem. The closing stanzas are sort of giving an uplifting message of hope and inspiration.
Wow, I really like that answer. Thank you, because you are right. This is the definition I gave, which is very similar. So there's strong themes of perseverance, staying strong and confident, while others try to bring you down. And like we said, still I'll rise shows the speaker's determination to overcome challenges. So good job. I really think that you nailed that. We're gonna move on now. So this is the next poem. We're just analyzing this one and then one more after that. But this one is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. So, once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of some one gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember I was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember rout its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books some cease of sorrow from the lost Lenore. But for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys a few seconds to really take in the poem and try to see if you notice any poetic devices that we talked about. And there may have been an example that I talked about earlier that is from this poem. So try to think about that as well.
So obviously there's rhyme elements, right?
Yes, thank you for noticing. Yeah, rhyme elements. Do you see anything else? I would say there's also repetition, which is interesting.
Yep. Is there any hyperbole?
That's a good question. Do you want me to show the answers to you guys now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there is no hyperbole in this excerpt, but here are the answers.
Imagery, right. Okay.
Yeah, so there's imagery in those lines. As of someone nearly rapping at my chamber door, tapping at my chamber door. We can visualize that. And then the rest, that line there, like it goes from imagery to personification, but I meant for both of it to be imagery. So, and it's also personification too, though. And each separate dying ember rout its ghost upon the floor. So that's very descriptive. We can visualize that in our minds, and it just gives a lot of detail to the setting. And then we also have alliteration, which I was getting at. It was an example earlier. We have weak and weary, quaint and curious. They both have that like similar sounding beginning constant. And then I nodded, nearly napping. They all have the beginning of like an N to start the word. And then at the ending here, we have rare and radiant. So there's a word separating those two, but they're both considered to be forms of alliteration. And then we have personification, and it's one line. Dying ember rout its ghost upon the floor. It's harder to perceive that one, but it is considered personification, like I've written down. Okay, so now let's try to look for the rhyme scheme. So again, sorry about that. Hold on, I think I went over one slide. I'll reshare my screen now. Okay, so let's try to look for the rhyme scheme here, shall we? So I'll read the last line, and you can't see the answer choices now. So weary lore, tapping door, more, December, floor, borrow, Lenore, evermore. So let's see the answer. So it goes A, B, C, B, 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 D, E, 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 B, 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 B. So there is kind of a rhyme scheme here. We have a lot of B's because everything seems to be rhyming with Lenore, and then we have door, more, Lenore, and evermore. So yeah. Now let's try to find the meaning of this passage. So this one, I'll just be approaching because you guys did a good job last time, but I just think this one's a little harder to articulate, so I will help. Okay, so basically this is called The Raven, so it gives a little context of what this is about. It's probably about a bird, and it really sets up the setting of it's at night, and the poet is like tired, but he can't go to sleep because there's a tapping at the window. So yeah, That's basically all we get from this part of the poem. Yes, so the poet is about to fall asleep. He hears a gentle tapping at his door, which he initially dismisses as a visitor. The setting is dark December night, like I said, and the dying embers of his fire cast ghostly shadows on the door. So yeah. Now let's move on. This is our last poem of the day. You guys have done a very great job, so let's try to finish strong now. So, shall I compare thee to a summer's day?
Sure.
So this is by William Shakespeare, and we discussed this earlier. This is a sonnet, which is just good to know, I guess. So now I'll just quickly read it, and this text looks a little easier to read now, but it's the same poem that we saw earlier. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often in his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometimes declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy external summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death drag thou wandered in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So for this one, these are the literary devices again, right? This one's a little harder to interpret and try to find literary devices because this is like an older piece of text, I guess. So I'll give you a few seconds to look at it, but I'll just show the answer choices then. All right. I'm going to show the answer choices now, or the answers. Okay, so the first line is considered a metaphor. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? So it's kind of a question, but it is a comparison of making the subject that William Shakespeare's referring to and comparing them to a summer's day. So next we have personification in rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. So this is one of the examples again where it gets a little confusing if it's personification, but in this context it is because the darling buds are shaking and that's a human action. And then next we have imagery for like this line and the next line. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often in its gold complexion dimmed. So this is considered imagery because it's like describing the sun, and we can visualize like a very hot sun that is like too hard to look at. And then the next part here is personification. The eye of heaven shines. So it's basically referring to the sun and earth and eye, sun. Either way, it's kind of referring to both, I guess. But it shines, which isn't an action that should be given to an object. So that's why it's considered personification. And then the next part, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. So this is again referring to the sun, but we give the sun pronoun of his and gold complexion dimmed, like that next part. So this is really referring to like giving a object human characteristics again. So that is considered personification. And then we have alliteration for every fair from fair. So yeah, it's the repetition of the F. And then thy external summer shall not fade. That's considered a hyperbole because it's over exaggerating. Summer cannot be eternal and not fade. And then we have a personification here. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade. So again, we're giving summer pronoun again. And I think it's referring to death as well. And then we have alliteration in the last line. Long lives, and this gives life to thee. So a lot of L's there. So let's try to find the rhyme scheme together of this poem. So I'm going to read the first word or the last word of each line, and we'll try to figure it out. So day temperate, May date shines dimmed, declines trimmed, fade, oust, shade, grossed, see thee. So now I'm going to reveal the answers. Here is the rhyme scheme of this sonnet. So again, I mentioned this earlier when we saw it at the beginning. It looks like every other line rhymes except for the last part, which rhymes the last two lines together. So yeah. And now let's try to find the meaning of this. So I would like your guys' input now. What do you think that this poem means? The answers. Hello?
Yeah, I'm right here. I'm listening. I'm looking at it. And I mean, I think he's just, the meaning is, it is an inspirational poem,
Yes.
right? And we're sort of a joyous poem. It's a beautiful summer day. He's painted a picture of sort of sun, warmth, inspiration.
Yes, I really like that definition. So yeah, you got a lot of elements of nature in this, I guess.
Yeah.
For both.
It's like you can almost feel, you can relate to a beautiful day, and he's put it in words.
Yes, that's very good job, because yeah, you just mentioned imagery. So yeah. Okay, and now thank you for today. So here's just today's takeaways I hope you've gained. So we learned of all the literary devices and the specifics of it. We learned about different poem structures and how it is like used and executed in poems. We learned about rhyme scheme. We learned how to analyze poems and how to write poems. And on that note, I would love to hear the poem that you were writing and you wanted to share, by the way, because I think we forgot to do that.
I think that was Lavina.
Lavina, would you like to share?
Yeah. So I have a poem I'd like to share.
Okay.
I'm going to read it out to you.
Okay.
Unless I can share my screen. Maybe not. Okay, I'm just going to read it out.
Okay.
Yeah? By the way, this was very informative.
Oh, thank you. I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed this lesson.
Yes, very much. So I'm going to read the poem. When I bring my dog, Rolly, to the park, he will look at me and bark. He watches a squirrel go up a tree, and then he tries to take the ball from me. When it gets late, I always have to wait. Because of that dog who's running through trees, he's always looking back at me.
Wow, that's a very nice free verse poem. And I love the rhyme scheme there. Very nice.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you for coming today.
Oh, thank you for having us. It was very informative. We learned about the different kinds of poetry. And this was very informative. Thank you. Will we get a participation certificate?
Yes, I just put in the chat at the beginning. I think both of you probably filled it out. It's just the stuff that we need to do for this, and then you fill out that form and you will get your volunteer hours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maya.
Thank you for coming. Bye, Lavina. Bye, Vish.
Bye.